I'm going to start with the author's note. There was, and yet there was not. That was the opening to a Georgian folktale my mom used to read to me, and in many ways, this contradictory notion holds true for my book. There was an almighty chaos which set in after my father died. In no particular order, my family's finances seesawed, routines went out the window, and my older siblings joined the Sullivanians, a cult that thrived on New York's Upper West Side until it disbanded in the late 80s. Our mom sought to reclaim her happiness with someone who made us children unhappy, and, in my own blunderbuss fashion, I found my moxie with friends who are still my go-to people to this day. Memory is an unreliable narrator. I wanted the freedom to condense time and not be beholden to biographic particulars, so I reimagined these events, firstly by making my fictionalized self 8 years older than I was in real life when we were bereaved. I have written truthfully about my experience without necessarily being truthful to the facts. I have taken liberties with events I was not privy to or which I heard about secondhand. By writing in the third person, I allowed Saskia to become a character who is me and not me. This, in turn, gave me the vehicle to be private and public. The only time I wrote in the first person is the following excerpt, which was my very first stab at tackling this story. Most importantly, I wanted to portray the exquisite peculiarities of growing up in a New York that no longer exists and pay homage to a city that will forever make my heart skip a beat. As in any good folktale, we eventually had a happy enough ending. We pulled through it, and then some, with an abundance of love, red wine, and dark humor. Some people have a bad hair day, but I had a bad hair decade. Looking back at it, I guess you could say that was the least of my problems. You see, my problems were of the chemical type, the fun, up till dawn, downtown party girl sort, and the sort where cesium meets water and the world as you know it blows up in your face. I've since traded in living on that little island off the east coast of America for another soggier one off the northwest coast of Europe. Mostly, I have good hair days now, thanks to brand name products and the knowledge I've gained over the years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This isn't a story about hair care and island hopping. It's about the time when we stopped being we after Daddy died. Oops, 1 second. I think of my father when I smell turpentine and cigarettes, baseball and highballs, Rothko Reds and the blue notes of jazz. NYC is my DNA. Blondie and the Great Blackout are in my bloodline. Broadway is a river in me, and my family are the rocks, worn smooth, which, no matter how far I travel, will always remain at the center of my being. Chapter 1, No Place Like Home, Chelsea, 1977. Right now, as the lights in the Empire State Building are being switched off, Saskia beholds the swagger of the city at dawn and feels her soul-changing colors. For the second time that night, Manhattan has held her to its heart and shown her the impossibility of darkness in the light of day. She crosses 7th Avenue when the walk sign changes and starts down the stairs to the Uptown Local, but stops mid-step when a white limousine with a wilted bouquet of flowers on its hood cruises to a halt and double parks at the corner of 23rd Street. She hurries back to street level, wondering if it's that very same limo from that night, way back when, before the world as she knew it fell down. She cautiously traces her reflection in its darkened window. It's as though only the pane of glass separates her from the past. True, she has the same curly hair and green eyes, but the scab on her thinned cheek and the faint red marks around her neck are as different as the girl she was 20-something years ago. She seems to reach into herself as she watches the limo pull off and disappear into traffic. Instead of continuing to the Uptown train, she ducks into a 24-hour deli where she selects a legal pad, a pen, a can of seltzer, and a box of Cracker Jacks. By the time she boards the downtown local, it's light outside.
So I'm Sandy, as you know, and I have a long history with Kaethe, starting in high school. So a lot of this novel, reading it, felt so comfortable and real and sad and poignant and all of those things. One of the things I love your line about memory being an unreliable narrator. So I wanted to know what was the most difficult part about writing this novel and writing it as a novel.
Most difficult part, I think, was writing about us as a family when we were still 4 people living together, because I don't remember much about that. So imagining the kind of machinations of having 4 people in a house instead of myself and my mother was really hard. So, and yeah, I think that was the trickiest part.
Okay. How did you choose your cast of characters? Because there are so many of them. Like, how did you draw from them? How did you decide who was who?
It was very difficult because I felt like there were so many people who informed my teens and, you know, my friendships and my family. So I felt like I had to make people sort of like a compilation of other people. So oftentimes 2 sets of characteristics would be represented by one character. And I also realized that I couldn't have too many people because it gets too freaking complicated to write about 15 people. So I had to keep it really simple. So I kept it quite small.
And how many drafts did you do?
About 1 million.
Okay. Okay. How many folks did you have reading it?
About 1,000.
Okay. Also, The Wizard of Oz, I saw that as a recurring theme quite a bit through your book. Can you talk a little bit about that?
One of the things that sparked me wanting to write the book was that I had a dream that I went back to my childhood home and was pounding on the door and going, I want to go home. I want to go home. And that realization that we all want to return to a place that no longer exists. Even if it's physically there, it's not spiritually the same place. And then I loved the whole journey of Dorothy, like how she's helped by her friends and how she navigates a new world and how they help her realize that she sort of has what it takes. And so I felt like I drew on that a lot.
And your naming of your characters, like Saskia, where does that come from and how did you choose that?
I think I realized when I was writing that I had to make things logical to me, even if it was different. So in real life, my father's favorite artist was Rembrandt, and Rembrandt's wife was named Saskia. So I thought, well, that's illogical. It feels familiar to me. And I loved naming characters. I loved choosing names, and I tried to be quite original. And then with some people, it would be the same letter that would define what their name might be. So I had a lot of fun with names.
And why did you write it when you wrote it?
That's a good question. Because I thought it was going to be easy. And it was the most difficult thing I ever did, so.
But there's a little bit more of that, isn't it?
I think I also felt that I was at a point where it was the recession, work got very difficult, I wasn't doing things that I felt I enjoyed very much, and I wanted agency. So I thought if I'm writing, this is my project and no one can take it away from me. So that was very important. And then you reach a point of no return where you think, I'm almost there, and then you realize you're not almost there, but it's too late to turn around and go back. So that was about 5 years ago.
So what I love also about this book is that it's a New York that we no longer see, right? So you live in London, right? So how does coming back and forth, how did you feel about writing this and it coming back to you, living here years ago? What were your memories? What were your memories like?
I mean, I'm very sentimental about things like the #1 Broadway local. I love that train. And certain stops have different associations, and certain stores, many of which don't exist any longer. Coffee shops which have closed down. New York is my New York has crumbled and most of it is gone, but New York will always rebuild itself and continue to reinvent itself. But there's always something familiar about it to me, despite that.
Right. What about your home on the Upper West Side? You think about that much?
The home I grew up in, definitely. That was a wonderful and terrible place where wonderful and terrible things happened. And, when we sold the apartment when my mother died, I was almost surprised by how sad I was to let it go, because I realized that the good memories outweighed the bad.
Right. What do you think your mom would say about this novel?
I think Mimi would be flattered on one hand and pissed off on another hand. I think she always wanted to be immortalized, and I think she thought that she was going to be immortalized through her husband's artwork or through his career, and that didn't happen quite that way. And I think she enjoyed being idiosyncratic and unconventional, and I definitely portray those qualities. And I think, but a very maternal heart beat within her, but it often got crowded out by other elements. But I think she would have recognized herself if she read it.
Did you have any trepidation about writing this? Any part of what you wrote?
Not really. I think it was just her opinion that I was anxious about. And I never told her about it, but I just found out from Pamela that she knew about it. So I don't know how that happened, but...
Oh, that's funny.
But, and I was very fortunate. I had my brother and sister's blessings to reimagine a time in our life that was quite messy when we were all acting out in different ways. But they were wonderful and supportive, and I thank them from the bottom of my heart.
Awesome. Great. Yeah. I have more questions. Okay. I will get to them in a minute. Well, actually, I have... what I wanted to talk about was the high school. So the high school you write about... You thought it had a cult-like quality?
I think so. Had 45 people in it.
A number of them are here.
And it was like big love. We all sort of... it was friendly and it was chaotic, but I think that the high school had a very warm side to it, and I think that I wanted a sense of community, and I think it provided that for me.
Okay, awesome. So I think we can take questions from the audience. And I'm sure someone has some.
I'll ask one. Kaethe, what was the most, I sometimes think we revisit our childhood at our own peril. What was the most troubling thing you learned about yourself in writing this novel?
I think the most troubling thing I learned about myself was realizing how long it took for me to think independently. That I wanted to defend my mother, I wanted to defend my siblings to a certain extent, and I often don't think I was defending myself within that. I think that I was overwhelmed sometimes by other people's issues, and so I let myself listen to that more than to my heart. So.
Was there anything that you had completely forgotten about your childhood that came back to you that you used in the novel?
Unfortunately not. I mean, I was sort of expecting to have more memories come up about my childhood, maybe about being a teenager, but not my childhood.
Oh, sure. When you're talking about New York being the New York we grew up in, it being gone, so I wonder in the writing of this, how do you feel like you were able to bring some of it? I mean, I struggle with this too, how to put into words or feeling the New York that was, and how to not just be that boring lady who's like, oh honey, that's where CB's used to be, and that's where blah blah used to be, and like, how do you put all that into, and do you feel like you were able to capture some of it?
I think I captured some of it. I think just that sense of adventure, like never being proofed and going out and coming back the next morning and drinking my cab money and
Yeah.
You know, taking the subway home when it was light, and you know, I think I captured. There was a joy to it. You know, it was scary sometimes, and I put myself in bad places sometimes. But that was the plus for me. You know, like I got a lot of independence, and all of a sudden I realized I could use this. And so once I started using it and flexing my muscles downtown, I realized I like it. You know, so there was no going back.
I read the first, I think it was the very first. Yeah, I think it was the first, right? And anyway,
Something
and
like
it
that.
was amazing, was totally amazing read. So I can't imagine what this could be like. So I guess my question is, from the beginning until the final book, what was the
The process?
yeah.
The process is just about the story itself, or the narrative arc, never changed much, but it was the telling that changed a lot, and just learning to not mix my metaphors and to, you know, to include internal thought, because I was guilty of having a lot of dialogue, but not a lot of interiority. Just making it tighter, making it less, but more.
But it's really the same,
Pretty much the same story, but I think it's just the telling of it
because
is
it was
more polished.
pretty amazing when I read it the first time.
Yeah.
When you said, when you said the hardest thing about writing was you're trying to envision your childhood in your house, like where did you land in the scheme? I remember going to your place and meeting your mom, but your siblings, was it because you were the baby or?
It's because I was the youngest, there was an age gap, and we did sort of start to leave, you know, I mean, the apartment that you visited was the apartment that we moved to, but my brother never lived there, but my sister did. So when I was trying to write the book using that apartment as a template, I was thinking, well, if Chris had lived here, he would have been, the maid's room would have been his bedroom. So I got very preoccupied with the details of it. So, but it was, no.
After this long story from your past, do you see a future? Or how's the future right now, and how you'll be writing again?
I'll definitely be writing again, and I definitely won't be writing a book again anytime soon, but I would like to do like a radio play or another play soon.
Yeah, I was wondering, do you have a favorite character?
Oh, trick question. No comment.
Oh, hi, Kaethe. I'm going to plug your father, Marvin Cherney. He was a terrific artist. He was an excellent artist. So why did you make Larry a gallery owner instead of an artist?
Because I found it, I think living with the legacy of his paintings was so difficult. And I just, like, that was one way I think I had to remove it from myself a bit. But I wanted him to be within the field that he could have been in, or, you know, in another life. But I did find the whole thing of just, you know, there was a weight to living with all that artwork, and I didn't want to deal with it, to be honest. So.
Can I ask you a question? I'm wondering. Oh, thank you. I'm wondering, because this is such a very personal journey in this book, and you've been very careful and considerate and graceful to honor your family in a way that allows us to understand that so many of these relationships were as they were, but many of the circumstances have changed, and you've done things to make it resound for you as you've heard it in your own very personal voice. And here when I received the first copy, which I thought was also a wonderful story, and I thought, oh, I hadn't heard for so long, I thought maybe you were slumming all these years.
Something
I'm
like
happy
that.
to see that you haven't been.
Yeah.
And I'm currently deep in this version of the novel and find it fascinating because I think all of us share, many of us, at least I can say I do, share a very personal relationship to other family members. It's very, very complicated. And for you to have drawn this, I wondered the journey, how has it led you to find you, or the you that you always have envisioned that you would be? Because something tells me that through this writing of this book, you've transformed in a new and different way. And just through my relationship with you, and just to say kudos and congratulations. But I wonder what that tastes and feels like. Has it been that kind of transformation for you to allow this voice to be heard?
I think it laid a lot of ghosts to rest and laid a lot of issues to rest, and I think therefore it freed me up in a lot of ways. And I sort of feel like I've done it. I know my family. I love my family. I forgive, my mother for all the crap I put her through, and vice versa. But I also feel like I'm not tortured by it any longer. So that's the beauty. And on that note, I'm going to say it's time for a drink.